It's beer o'clock on Real Ale Craft Beer. Today we've got a beer from Herforder, Brewery Herforder, and it's a bottle of their export beer. It's coming in at 5.2% ABV in a 330 milliliter bottle. And we've got the bottle cap here to show you. Export beer, I find it fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because the export style of beer once dominated probably a lot of Europe and the world, and now it's a shadow. The export style of beer is a shadow of its former self. Let's get the beer out into a glass and see what we get. But we'll talk about that in a moment, because it's very much a what could have been a similar story with craft beer. We'll talk about that in a moment, and I suppose we'll talk about my slight frustrations with craft beer brewers. But first of all, we're going to talk about Herforder export. It's 5.2% ABV. Lots of carbonation on this one. Look at the carbonation. Rolling up the side of the glass. We've got a 3-finger white head. Loads of carbonation rolling up the middle of the glass. It's very pale. It's straw-coloured beer. Could look like a Helles, couldn't it? Or a Pilsner. But it's not. It's an export. So very clear looking beer. There's nothing in the way of sediment at all, not even particles in this beer. So it's been really filtered, this beer. Let's get the aroma. Smells good. Smells good. Almost a slight kind of grassy, stinging nettle mustiness to it. Good. Now this beer was kindly sent to us by our channel sponsors, beersofeurope.co.uk. Beers of Europe are the largest online beer store in the UK, with a fabulous range of beer from all over the world. America, I've had beers from Turkey, all over. I've lost track of countries I've had beers from Beers of Europe from. Probably Canada, definitely Germany, Belgium, France, Africa, China, like Chinese beer. Yeah, it's a really good company. So if you've been on holiday or if you've been away working and you found that beer that you love whilst you were away and you wish you could find it in the UK, well, the best place to find that beer, or the best chance you would have of finding that beer, would be beersofeurope.co.uk. There's a link in the description box of the video if you want to check it out. But here we go then. Let's get into this one. It's got a really interesting aroma to it. Cheers. That's nice. That's nice. The Germans have got a really fantastic way of brewing beer where you can drink this beer at 5.2% ABV, and it's absolutely the most refreshing, drinkable, wonderful golden liquid that you ever want to put to your mouth. Absolutely fantastic. It's so crispy, so drinkable, so refreshing. I've been to small German beer festivals, and these beers are just dangerously drinkable. I was with Brewery Meisel And so I landed in Frankfurt airport, and then I was on a train for like 2 or 3 hours until I finally made it to this beer festival in Meisel Brewery. They have this wonderful tap house where they got an old brewery on the side. Beer's being fed in. You can have pizza, you can have burgers, breakfast. Amazing food and drink, of course. Amazing Weiss beer and Dunkels and wonderful stuff. But my point is, and the reason why I'm talking about Meisel, where I probably should be talking about Herforder, is the fact that what I found when I was at this beer festival in Germany is that the beer was just, it was flying down. It was just the most incredible liquid ever. The most incredible beer festival ever. Because the beer was sliding down. And you wake up with no hangover. You wake up with no headache whatsoever. And that beer here in my hand is reminding me of the German Beer Festival, where there was no hangover, but the beer was so drinkable. It's reminding me of this stuff here. So it's crisp, it's refreshing. There's a stinging nettle flavour coming through from the hops. It's a bit spicy. There's a little bit of bitterness coming through, but it's definitely more malty. And that brings me very quickly to the fascinating story of export and what could have been with craft beer around the world in the last 10 years. So, back in the 17th century, there were the big dominant brewers in Germany were the export brewers. They were brewing this style of beer. And they were exporting it all over Europe. They were huge German brewers that were literally, they had the stranglehold. A bit like today's market, where you've got the likes of, not so much anymore, but the likes of Carling, Foster's, Budweiser, Heineken and Carlsberg. They're your main kind of brands. Maybe Madri if you want to add another new kind of style of beer, but that's still owned by the big conglomerate companies. So there's probably 4 to 5 big international brewers in the world now that dominate the scene. And this was the same back in Germany in the 1700s. They had this stranglehold on the beer market. But what happened back then was there were smaller breweries. It might have been 18th century, I say 17th, might have been the 18th century. I might be 100 years out yet. But anyway, my point is that there were companies, small brewers like Krombacher, who were producing the Pilsner. And there were other smaller Pilsner breweries, Pilsner style breweries in the 17th, 18th, might have been very early 19th century, that they were just going about their business producing Pilsner style beer, and the German market loved it. And before you knew it, they were gobbling up all of the market share in Germany. But there was no social media back then. There was no social media. There weren't people like me going, oh, look at this fantastic beer on a video camera that's then being sent around the blooming world. It didn't exist back then. So what happened was, pardon me, the Pilsner breweries basically slid underneath the radar, and then they become the great big breweries of the world. Your Kronbachers and your great big Pilsner brewery, your Warsteiners, another one, producing great Pilsner beer that people wanted to drink over this export style of beer. So before you know it, the export breweries were shrinking and the Pilsner breweries were kind of taking that market share from them. And that's the frustration. because the craft beer movement could have been the same. If the likes of Brewdog, Oscar Blues, Beavertown, if they all held firm, if they all stayed independent and held firm, they would have carried on gobbling up market share, and they would have eventually toppled the giants of Heineken and Carlsberg and Anheuser-Busch and all the Asahi and all these other companies. They would have toppled it eventually. It would have taken a long time, because I'm pretty sure the Pilsner breweries probably took about 50 to 60 to 70 years to do the very same thing to the export brewers in Germany. But that's the frustrating part, is that this day and age we have Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and Untapped and Rate Beer and all these other places. So all that the big brewers got to do these days is to just have a radar on what's going on. And then once a style or once a brewery or once a company becomes slightly big, they just buy them. They just buy them and in Beavertown's case, let's just use Beavertown, they just make their beer a bit rubbish, and then there's no threat, is there? There's no threat to Heineken, there's no threat to Carlsberg, because Beavertown's beers taste a bit rubbish now and nobody really cares about them. So they paid £40 million for Beavertown. Bit of a price, but at the same time they've closed them down. Back to this though, I like this export style beer, it's very good. It's quite malty, quite sweet. There's a little bit of bitterness, but I can see why Pilsner smashed it. I can see why Pilsner, even now Hellas Lager, I think Hellas Lager is the new Pilsner. It's doing to Pilsner what Pilsner did to export. The Hellas Lager is doing that right now. Yeah. So that's the story of export beer and my frustration with craft beer. But I'm going to rate this. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Herforder Export, 7 out of 10. Please put your comments in the comments box. Subscribe to our daily beer and food reviews. Give us a big fat thumbs up. Boom! Cheers.